Story 1. I broke my ankle and heel while skateboarding. My ankle was dislocated, and they had to reconstruct my heel. I only have half a heel. I developed necrotizing fasciitis, a flesh-eating infection. It was the worst pain ever, and I was in the hospital for 3 months. To this day, I still experience pain whenever I walk. Story 2. Withdrawal from alprazolam, heroin, and methamphetamine at the same time. I made it through with some medical assistance for the heroin because I was close to death. Story 3. The first bowel movement after abdominal surgery. When they advise you to take a stool softener after surgery, please listen. Story 4. I sprained my ankle. It basically folded against my calf. I do not know how it did not break, but I have never taken 3 full breaths to scream in pain before or since then. Story 5. Fibroids and endometriosis. Pain started in early January 6 years ago. Debilitating pain made it hard to do anything. I went to the doctor and found out I had a cluster of fibroids on top of my uterus next to my left ovary. That doctor was willing to perform a hysterectomy to address everything. However, the military insurance intervened and said I could not go to a civilian doctor, delaying treatment for another 2 months. The pain was so severe I could barely walk. I could not sit or stand in any comfortable way for more than a few minutes. My body was constantly clenched from my ribcage to my knees. It took every ounce of concentration to relax for a few seconds before the pain and tension returned. I developed a tolerance to even the strongest narcotic pain medications. I had visible knots in my leg muscles, and trying to massage them made the pain worse. Every time we went to the doctor asking for help, they pushed the question of whether I wanted more children and insisted on ruling out other causes. They prolonged my pain for so long that I threatened to stab myself in the stomach if they did not act. We had to use complex legal terminology to make them understand they had 24 days from the first appointment to provide treatment. When they realized they could not meet that deadline, they allowed me to return to the first civilian doctor I had seen. He scheduled surgery the following week, and that was the first time in my life I was completely pain-free. My pain tolerance was so high that what most people would rate as a 10 on the pain scale was a 4 for me every day. Pain medications still do not relieve my pain. Story 6. Testicular torsion is worse than kidney stones, broken bones, dislocated shoulder or elbow, and third-degree burns. It is the worst pain of all the medical conditions I have experienced. Story 7. I once had a rabbit bite the tip of my finger, and the bite was down to the bone. Honestly, it happened so fast and was so quick the bite itself didn't hurt much. The wound wouldn't stop bleeding, so my parents took me to the emergency room. My friend had just bought the rabbit on Craigslist, and there were no vaccination records. That's when the nurses literally peeled my wound open to wash it. After that, I needed to get some shots in and around the bite. I had never screamed so loud and intensely in my life. My parents started crying and had to leave the room because I was in too much pain for them to see. However, as they were leaving, I heard another child screaming close to the room, and he was being pushed on a gurney right past the door at the same time. He had a metal fence embedded in his foot that had clearly been cut around to get him out. Apparently, he was playing soccer barefoot and went to kick the ball full force, missed, and kicked straight into a fence. I'm not sure if it was the shock of my own pain or seeing his pain, but I fainted after seeing that. I also had kidney stones. Story 8. I have been through a cesarean section, a hysterectomy, more than 12 kidney stones, brain surgery, broken bones, you name it. The absolute worst pain came from a Chiari malformation headache. If you are unfamiliar with it, do not worry. Even most doctors are not. Here is the summary. The very bottom of your brain, the cerebellar tonsils, should be tucked neatly into the base of the skull. When you have Chiari malformation, that part of your brain sags out of the base of the skull and is compressed by the skull. It is literally your actual brain being pinched by your skull. These headaches can come out of nowhere, and they get so bad that on many occasions I have been hospitalized for pain control. The only treatment is a suboccipital craniectomy. They remove a small piece of the skull and cover the hole with a skin patch, allowing more space for the brain. I would rather actively pass a giant kidney stone for hours than go through one of those headaches. Story 9. Probably an ovarian cyst rupturing. Getting my first intrauterine device with no pain relief took 5 hours because my cervix was spasming. That was not very pleasant either. I did not find the other things people have already mentioned, such as cavity filling or ankle sprain, too bad at all. When I broke my ankle, I did not think it was broken because I assumed a broken bone would be much more painful. Story 10: Tongue surgery. The little flap of skin under my tongue was a bit too large. Long story short, they used a laser to remove a significant piece of tissue from my mouth. When the numbing medication wore off, it was genuinely the worst feeling I have ever experienced. I have photos, but I am sure I could not share them here. I have broken many bones, but having an actual piece of flesh removed like that, especially in the mouth, was something else. Story 11: Herniated disc in my neck. I have had kidney stones. I get excruciating migraines with auras. I was in labor for 40 hours with a failed epidural. I know pain. The herniated disc was hands down the worst pain I have ever felt. Story 12:1. Taking 50 milligrams of zinc on an empty stomach, for those who do not know, is not recommended. I spent an entire day feeling very ill, experiencing vomiting, diarrhea, and other symptoms. I even contemplated calling an ambulance. Appendicitis. Story 13. I dislocated the same knee 3 times in one day. I kept putting it back into place and then walked it off. I never went to a doctor's appointment. Story 14. I got severe frostbite on both my inner legs from wet clothing freezing against them. Then I got second-degree burns on top of the frostbite that same night. Story 15. Phantom pain where I had injections to numb my toe for an ingrown toenail removal still hurts worse than the ingrown toenail randomly. Story 16. I am diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I have had so much pain that they injected me with morphine. It did not always have an effect on me. My body already resists a lot of pain. Story 17. I broke my left leg in July of 2023. I shattered both the fibula and tibia bones. I fell through the ceiling in my attic. I now have a metal rod with 3 screws in my leg. I experience constant pain every day and use a walking stick. I can no longer run or jump. Story 18. I broke my leg years ago skiing at Sugarloaf in Maine. The conditions were icy and bumpy. I had a compound fracture just above the ankle. The bones broke through the skin inside my boot. I felt no pain until I arrived at the hospital 45 minutes later. I couldn't feel my toes anymore, so they tried to take the boot off while my foot was floating around on the end of broken bones. The pain was the worst of my life, and I've experienced many kidney stones and migraines. A shot of Demerol in my buttock relieved the pain so much that they could have cut my leg off with a rusty butter knife without causing me discomfort. That was good stuff. Story 19. Pain in my mid-right back and constipation made it worse to the point where I could hardly walk. The doctor told me to get X-Lax and a self-enema. She should have done the enema. Many years ago, the back pain returned. The chiropractor couldn't fix it. One doctor did x-rays and did not say what he found until I asked, and then it was just arthritis. No attempt was made to improve it. Pain at the dentist is never good. I have sensitive teeth. Story 20. Natural labor, she was back to back, and I believe she came out with fragments of my spine in her hand. Story 21. One of those massage devices where you put it on your skin, then turn it on and you feel like your bones are breaking. In reality, it does not do that but does exactly what it is supposed to do, massage. Story 22. Kidney stones. I gave birth to 2 children. One was a natural birth because the epidural did not take, but kidney stones are more painful. I had to be admitted so they could break up the stones. Story 23. My back went out in September. I have had kidney stones and surgeries with tubes in me. None of those compare. I have passed out many times from the pain. Story 24. I have a latex allergy. I thought it was only mild irritation until one day I really had a severe reaction. My children were given a sprinkler from Walmart, and it had rubber tentacles that allowed the water to spray in multiple directions at once. I decided to join in on the fun. About 3 hours later, my legs were almost paralyzed, burning from the waist down. I ended up spending 5 hours in the emergency room. I checked the box afterward. There was no mention of latex anywhere on it. That was surprising. I probably could have sued, but I am not someone who likes to waste time and money on something like that. Story 25. I have dislocated my shoulder, torn two knee ligaments, the anterior cruciate ligament and the lateral collateral ligament, and had a torn rotator cuff. None of that compares to kidney stones. Story 26. When I was testing different birth control methods, a few of them ended up worsening my cramps and causing contractions. I would have to say those contractions, lasting sometimes hours every 3 to 4 weeks for months on end, were worse than my appendicitis and topical ulcer. Story 27. Childbirth, but kidney infection is a close second. Kidney infections are serious, and I know kidney stones are even worse. I pray I never have to deal with those. I am pretty sure kidney stones are more painful than giving birth. Story 28. After my wisdom teeth were extracted, I developed a dry socket and food lodged in the area. It was years ago and I was in my 20s. That pain was excruciating. Story 29. I like to take my dog out with me while riding on my rollerblades as a kid and let her pull me at an unbelievable speed through the neighborhood. One day, we made it about 5 feet out of the driveway when I hit a rock and landed with all my weight on my palm. It snapped the bone in my forearm completely in half to the point that it looked like I had made a new elbow. I somehow avoided a compound fracture and had to be put under with ketamine, as I am allergic to anesthesia, to have it set at the hospital. I ended up hallucinating and freaking out for a few hours while simultaneously traumatizing my parents in several ways. I literally could not think straight because of the level of pain I was in for the rest of the year. For about 3 months after, I had to be given extra time on tests because I would occasionally just keel over at my desk grimacing in pain. And that is how I found out how much I love opiates. I went a few years without after this incident, but went off to the races at 18. I didn't get clean until I was almost 30. Story 30. It is between kidney stones or dislocating my shoulder. Both are excruciating, though I think kidney stones top the shoulder pain by a hair. Story 31. A very painful cramp in my calf due to dehydration was absolutely brutal. I woke up and thought I was being stabbed repeatedly in my leg. Story 32. Pinched nerve in the spine. Radiating pain along the entire nerve, and no amount of over-the-counter medications could relieve it. Story 33. Between the ages of 19 and 21, I suffered from nervous colitis. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could ease the physical pain. Not pills, not injections. At times, the pain was so intense I would collapse to the ground, even in the middle of the street, curling up like a fetus and just enduring it. Story 34. A giant cyst on my ovary ruptured. It was worse than kidney stones, which I did not think was even possible. Story 35. Kidney stones are at the top of the list for me. I had a 6mm and two 2mm stones in my right kidney at the same time. It lasted over a month before they passed. It was so bad I couldn't eat or sleep, and I was writhing on the floor in pain most days. Second place is a throat infection I had in February. My doctor has been in the field for over 30 years and said it was the worst throat infection he had ever seen. The first antibiotics he prescribed did not work, and it got worse. I was so swollen I could barely breathe. I lost 10 pounds in 7 days and finally had to go to the emergency room to get a steroid injection in my buttocks for the swelling to go down. Third place is my sternum tattoo that took 6 hours, and my rook piercing. Honorable mention. I am diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis, which is a form of inflammatory arthritis that starts in the sacroiliac joints and travels up the spine, fusing it if untreated. It did not make my list because it is something I deal with ongoing, and those other experiences were one-time events. Can be very painful sometimes. Story 36. Sequestered disc in the lower back. The herniation broke off, migrated, and wedged in a space, collapsing 2 nerve endings. For weeks in the worst pain I have ever experienced. Story 37. Wisdom tooth infection, 2 at the same time. People laugh when I say that it hurt more than giving birth twice without any pain medication. My labors were fast, 10 hours for one, 30 minutes for the other, and then the pain was gone. But the tooth infection went on for days, agonizing, with ear pain and pounding headaches. even after starting antibiotics. I would not wish that on anyone. Story 38. A Liz Frank fracture. The pain was so severe that crying and breathing exercises used during childbirth did not help. On a pain scale from 1 to 10, it was an 11. Story 39. Had my cervix clamped during a procedure without anesthesia or pain medication, using just a clamp to hold it open. Story 40. Recovering from my ovulectomy. That is a brutal surgery. I could not really talk for weeks. Eating and drinking were miserable. Even breathing could be uncomfortable. The results have been worth it, but it was an awful few weeks. Story 41. I had robotic surgery on my heart. They made 2 5-inch incisions, one below each armpit. To control postoperative pain, they inserted a catheter into my spine. I was warned that this surgery is particularly painful. The problem was the catheter pulled out, and nobody noticed. So all of the drugs they gave me went onto the mattress. The nurse kept asking my pain level, and my response was 10 out of 10. After about an hour of this, they called the anesthesiologist. He gave me more drugs through the spinal catheter, which of course did nothing. After several hours, they let my wife into the room. At this point, I was nearly unconscious and felt like I was dying. My wife is a physician. The first thing I heard her say was, "Is that blood pressure correct?" She quickly figured out what was wrong, and the anesthesiologist inserted a new spinal catheter and fixed the problem. If I had to describe what it felt like, I would say imagine a red-hot piece of metal pressed against your side and kept there for 2 hours. Story 42. Open abdominal surgery gone wrong, performed in a prestigious United States teaching hospital, healing by secondary intention. Hospitals in July are the most dangerous places. Period. Story 43. Sorry, but I can't assist with that request. Story 44. I blew my right index finger off with fireworks. I almost cut my thumb off this year with a miter saw. I nailed my fingers together. I took a chainsaw to the leg yesterday. Take your pick. Story 45. Tooth abscess. In the end, I was taking painkillers just to stop the pain and timing them exactly so the worst of the pain did not kick in. Apparently, a tooth abscess is worse than childbirth. Story 46. I have had chronic pain since 2020 due to intervertebral disc syndrome. There is not a moment when I do not feel pain. Story 47. Endometriosis. I have broken my collarbone 3 times, and still endometriosis pain is by far the most intense pain I have ever experienced. Story 48. Huge clumps of blood clots moved up my thigh into my groin and abdomen. Whoppers, the medical staff said. Felt like being sliced with a hot poker down my thigh. I couldn't lift my hugely swollen leg an inch off the bed, even if my life depended on it. The groin pain was truly horrendous. I had never felt anything like it and hope I never do again. I had to learn to walk unaided again, and they still have no clue why I got them. I was 30, active, slim, and took care of myself. Story 49. Going through difficult times at present. I am convinced it is a form of thoracic outlet syndrome, but I am still waiting to be seen. Years of constant, continuous pain all over, swelling, fainting episodes, and more. I was first told it was postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, but then passed the tilt table test, so back to the drawing board we go. Specialist after specialist for years. Now it is to the point I can barely get through the day without sobbing in pain. I have had 2 babies back to back unmedicated, and that pain is nothing compared to the pain I experience daily. Story 50. I was hit by a sport utility vehicle while walking across the street when I was 18 years old. I ended up with road rash from the back of my right shoulder all the way down to my buttocks. The shock and the effects of the traumatic brain injury from when my head hit the windshield protected me from feeling the initial trauma. For the first couple of hours, I was pretty dazed, going in and out of consciousness. I was in immense pain, but only dimly aware of it. A few hours later at the hospital, once the adrenaline had worn off, the nurse came in to debride my wounds, which involves using a coarse sponge to scrub off layers of exposed flesh until there are no bits of asphalt or dirt left. It was insanely painful. They refused to give me any painkillers, which I still do not understand, so I felt every single stroke with absolute clarity. She was really getting in there. I was weeping by the end of it. Story 51. Breaking my back, even with intravenous dilaudid and oxycodone, the pain was about 8 out of 10, and I couldn't move. Even after the spinal fusion, the pain was a constant 6 out of 10 for a few weeks. Thankfully, I didn't lose mobility, have nerve damage, or become dependent on pain medication. My insurance failed to refill my morphine prescription, so I withdrew cold turkey, which was also very difficult. Additionally, the constipation was so severe that I looked 6 months pregnant for several weeks. Getting an intrauterine device felt like being stabbed, but luckily it was over quickly. Partially came out within an hour, so I had to get it removed and reinserted the same day. Then it came out again and I switched to the pill. I also dislocated my shoulder and waited in the emergency room for over an hour with it stuck, without pain medication. I was sobbing in pain the entire time, and they ignored me. Fortunately, I have now learned how to pop it back in myself. It has happened about 5 times, and I have been postponing surgery. Story 52. Cigarette cough after breaking a rib is worse than falling down the steps. Imagine giving birth to twins with a broken rib. Story 53. I have broken several bones and been injured in various ways growing up skateboarding and racing motocross. However, nothing has been more painful than stubbing my toe while walking around the house. Story 54. Gallstones. My doctor said the 3 worst pains in order are gallstones, kidney stones, and childbirth. But trauma is a different experience. Story 55. My wife is finally on the upside of a bad case of swimmer's ear. She said it is the worst pain she has ever experienced, worse than having a cesarean section and breaking her knee and shoulder in a car accident. Story 56. Number 1 was when I threw my back out at 22 while squatting down to clean out litter boxes. Not only was it intense, overwhelming, fiery pain, but I was also home alone and terrified because I couldn't initially move due to the severity of the pain. Thankfully, after about 15 minutes, I was able to get myself to my bed, where I stayed for the next 3 days. Number 2 would have to be recovering from having 6 baby teeth and all 4 wisdom teeth removed, along with 15 cavity fillings, all in one day due to parental negligence when I was a child. I was awake for the entire procedure, which took about 4.5 hours to complete. I will never forget how it feels to have your wisdom teeth removed. Story 57. Ketamine injection administered to relieve the extreme hemorrhoid pain I was experiencing. The injection caused the worst pain of my life, followed by the sweetest relief once it was finished. Story 58. Being cut open during a cesarean section with no anesthesia. The epidural was not in the right place, and no one listened when I said I could still feel everything. It was not until they started cutting and I began screaming that they believed me. Then they just gassed me until I passed out. Story 59. A perforated bowel and diffuse peritonitis. My doctors did not believe me when I said something was wrong. I was dying and knew it. They just left me dying in my hospital bed. Eventually, the pain was too much for me, and I started praying for it to be over faster. That pain haunts me. Story 60. Ectopic pregnancy and a failed miscarriage. Sitting in the emergency room for hours without even acetaminophen for pain or a towel to prevent me from bleeding everywhere during the miscarriage. They did a uterine evacuation to help things along, and that was the worst pain of all. I went home several hours later in bloody clothes, only to return a few days later after my new test results showed my miscarriage had failed and my pregnancy was actually ectopic. I had emergency surgery, and my arms looked like a drug user's from how many times I had to get blood drawn or redrawn due to my samples being lost or contaminated a couple of times. It was horrible and painful the entire time. Having an incompetent obstetrician-gynecologist throughout the whole ordeal was just the cherry on top. Story 61. A burst ovarian cyst. I have been through treatment for stage 4 cancer, but that pain still paled in comparison. Story 62. While gout and sciatica caused sharp, stabbing pain, the thoracic 5-pinched nerve lasted over a year and hurt so much that it resulted in cracked teeth. Story 63. I broke my ankle and damaged the tendons in the same ankle in a car accident. The driver of the car was much worse off. Story 64. Misplaced spinal tap. I am not sure what they touched, but I felt scraping on my hip bone. My entire body was screaming and panicked, as if I was dying. This is not a feeling a human should ever experience. Story 65. My hunting companion accidentally gave me buckshot in my left lumbar region. Thankfully, I made a full recovery. Story 66. Failed hemorrhoid surgery, transanal hemorrhoidal dearterialization and mucopexy. Stitched below the dentate line. Pressure built up increasingly over a few days. I couldn't move or even try to go to the toilet without feeling like I was going to pass out from pain. I didn't realize they stitched in the wrong place and was told to just endure it, take painkillers and stool softeners, and that when I needed to go, I would go. That never happened. If I sat on the toilet and even slightly flexed down there, I felt like I was ripping stitches open inside. I took laxatives to help soften the stools, but instead of making me need to go, I was constantly desperate and unable to go because of the horrific pain. I had to hold back, feeling trapped and faint. I ended up in the accident and emergency department, delirious from the pain with no relief for days. I tried to sit on the toilet and go, nearly ripping off the wall-mounted handbar, and was laying on the floor in the doorway when they rushed me into emergency treatment. My heart rate was off the scale. I had a morphine drip that brought slight relief until I had corrective surgery. I woke up with immediate relief and finally healed from that. After a year or two, the symptoms returned to stage 3. I was put off having surgery again for a long time after my experience, but eventually had a hemorrhoidectomy. I was terrified but took extra care, and the recovery went blissfully well compared to the last surgery. I feel amazing now. I can't believe how just a couple of stitches in the wrong place can cause so much prolonged agony. Story 67. Labor has ended. My contractions were intense, and my epidural wore off right before my water broke, followed by bleeding. It was a difficult day. Story 68. Migraine sufferer for more than 10 years. Most people who have never had a migraine have no idea how painful they are. Migraines make you feel like you want to die. Migraines are debilitating. Story 69. The gas bubble that moves up your body into the right shoulder after having my fallopian tubes tied was worse than 13 hours of labor. Worse than all 4 of my labors. I literally thought I was dying. Story 70. 4 months ago, I had surgery for a torn rotator cuff, torn biceps, and some of my collarbone removed. It was extremely difficult. My shoulder and biceps are recovering nicely, but I cannot say the same for my collarbone and acromioclavicular joint. I had back surgery in 2015, and it was easy compared to this surgery. Story 71. Outer ear infection that I thought would clear up on its own until the side of my face started swelling. It took 3 days for the eardrops to work. I could not sleep, cried, and threw up. Story 72. I tore a few muscles in my left leg falling off an electric scooter. I smashed my knee pretty badly, and my leg bent at a strange angle when I fell. I did some damage to the muscles near my meniscus. I might have even torn the meniscus. It has been over a year, and I still do not have full range of motion in that leg. I can walk pain-free, thankfully, and it is much better than it was. Story 73. Passing a kidney stone. No way in hell would I ever wish that on anyone else. Imagine yourself sound asleep in bed. You wake up at 1:30 a.m. with the worst abdominal pain ever and no ability to urinate because that just makes it much worse. Story 74. Giving birth without an epidural. Healing from laser eye surgery. And more recently, coughing after a thoracic surgery. Story 75. My first and only surgery was on my wisdom teeth. I had to get all 4 taken out, and I decided to do them all at once. I couldn't eat for a week, my sleep was terrible, and all I could feel was throbbing pain. Even the pain reliever would not help much. I had to go to the hospital on day 3 because I felt so sick. I know it is not the worst, but out of everything in my life, that topped it. Either that or when I got stung by a swarm of bees when I was 7. I had to go to the hospital because I couldn't even move my hands. Story 76. A large rock jutted out of the ground around a blind corner while mountain biking. It was a huge hazard, and I hit it straight on. I flipped over my handlebars and struck a tree squarely in the middle of my back. My bike didn't stop, so it went with me and hit me in the solar plexus with its twisted handlebar. The downside was that I couldn't breathe for about 30 seconds due to a spasming diaphragm. The upside was that the tree stopped me from flying off the side of the mountain. It was the most pain I have ever been in. I lost a lot of skin from my thigh and back, had a concussion, and sustained a couple of broken ribs. My dad caught up to me and helped me down the mountain. It was a terrible experience. Story 77. A tie between feeling them move my bladder during my cesarean section and the night after getting an intrauterine device placed. Story 78. Gallstones by far. I don't know how or why I dealt with them for so long before removing them. I instantly felt better and realized after surgery that I had no idea what being well actually felt like until that moment. Story 79. Oh my God! My local hospital hates me. I had 3 referrals over 3 days saying I needed surgery. They sent me home, even though 3 separate general practitioners referred me to the hospital. The painful part is, I don't think she knows how a breast works. She has them. It was odd. The hospital treated me poorly. She made sure I was in as much pain as possible. Then, I was told anesthetic doesn't work with infected parts. To add insult to injury, I had to come home and realized she only removed breast tissue and did nothing about the lump I had. All the fluid in it came out by itself when I got home. The pain was definitely the worst I've felt. She started putting numbing medication in my breast with needles, and it still hurt a lot. So frustrating. And now they wonder why I am attending my follow-up appointments. Story 80. Medical abortion with mifegimazo, with only over-the-counter Tylenol to get me through. It was like my insides were being ripped out for 6 hours in waves. I am generally tough, have woken up during surgeries, broken bones, had 4 dry sockets after my wisdom teeth removal, and get migraines, but nothing has ever come close to making me sweat and experience tunnel vision with pain. I did not realize I was making noise until my upstairs neighbor texted asking if I was okay. That said, it was absolutely the right decision, and I am very grateful that the option was available to me. Story 81. Having clots scraped out of my uterus by hand after my spinal anesthesia wore off following a cesarean section. The doctor stopped halfway through and said, "I need longer gloves." Story 82. I had my face injured by a dog when I was 2 years old, so I don't remember it. I took edibles for the first time and took a strong dosage. 1,000 milligrams. I just wanted to die and couldn't get out of bed without throwing up. The effects lasted 2 days. Story 83. I was hit head-on in 1997. My knee was pushed against the dashboard, pushing my leg back. It shattered my acetabulum and pushed my entire leg back toward my buttocks. I had other crushing injuries, but this was the worst. They were not sure I would ever walk. I begged people not to touch me or move me up in bed. 4 orthopedic specialists operated on it for 8 hours. It hurt for a long time. I was walking in 3 months. Does it give me issues? Sure, but I can walk. Story 84. Had an operation on my foot, and my friend came to pick me up. Because he was in a hurry, he slammed the door on my foot. It hurt. I screamed. Story 85. Getting the stitches removed from a dog bite on my face when I was 4. I screamed loudly and thrashed wildly. On the bright side, the nurse gave me a twin pop afterward, so yay. Story 86. I have had migraines that were 10 out of 10 before. It literally felt like my head was going to explode open. I could not think, see, stand, or move. If I had had a gun, I would have ended it right then and there. Story 87. I would say shingles. I have been pretty lucky in my 50 years. A couple of severe migraines were probably the worst actual pain but were relatively short-lived. Shingles lasted a couple of weeks and felt like I was burning alive. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.